So I just want to run with you real quick on the topics that will be covered on the final exam. The final is just going to cover chapters 6 through 10 and not chapters 1 through 5, although the material from chapters 1 through 5 is covered in chapters 6 through 10. You're not going to be able to understand chapter 6 if you don't know supply and demand or opportunity cost or any of the other concepts that we learned in the earlier chapters. Okay, so for chapter 6, what's important from this chapter? You need to understand how opportunity cost relates to the supply curve, and basically that the marginal cost curve or the supply curve is the marginal cost curve, and opportunity cost is part of marginal cost. You have to understand how to calculate marginal cost. It's slightly different this chapter than we've done it before. Remember, marginal cost usually was just the change in total cost as we go one more unit. But in this case, sometimes output can change as well. So we need to remember that the change in total cost divided by the change in output. When the change in output is just 1, as it has been in previous times, then the marginal cost was just the change in total cost divided by 1, which is just the change in total cost. But now it's different. Now it's the change in total cost divided by the change in output. And so if you forget to divide the change in total cost by the change in output, you will get the wrong answer for marginal cost, and that can have implications for whether or not you choose the right profit maximizing level. So on to profit maximization for the competitive firms. Remember, the rule is they maximize profits where price equals marginal revenue. But marginal revenue equals price for competitive firms. Remember, their demand curve is perfectly flat or horizontal. And so that means that their price is their marginal cost. So a profit maximizing competitive firm is going to produce where price equals marginal cost. Okay. Also, you need to know the firm's shutdown condition in the short run and the long run. In the short run, the firm will shut down if the price falls below their average variable cost, and they'll shut down in the long run if price is below their average total cost, which means they have negative profit. And you also have to understand how to calculate producer surplus. Okay, chapter 7 was about the invisible hand. So for chapter 7, you had to understand accounting versus economic profit. Remember, accounting profit is just basically revenue minus explicit cost, and economic profit is revenue minus explicit cost minus implicit cost. Understand the theory of the invisible hand, specifically how firms respond to profits and losses. So remember, if firms in a particular industry are earning positive profit, every other firm in the world is earning zero profit, and so they're going to flood into this firm or this industry that is earning positive profits. That's going to shift the supply curve to the right, reduce the price, and reduce the profits for all the other firms in there, and that's going to keep going on until profit is zero in all industries. Similarly, for firms that are earning losses, if a firm is earning a loss, then they know they could go get in any other industry and earn zero, so they're going to get out of that industry. That'll shift the supply curve to the left, increase the price that is earned for those companies who stay in that industry, and that's going to increase their profit, and that's going to go on again until industry profit in all industries is zero. Know the difference between economic profit and economic rent, the difference between equilibrium and social optimum, and how to calculate total surplus. And remember, total surplus is just consumer surplus plus producer surplus. And also understand how to calculate deadweight loss, or the change in economic surplus, if we enact a price control in a market that previously was unregulated. For chapter 8, this is all about imperfect competition, so know the difference between monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Understand how to calculate the marginal revenue. Remember, marginal revenue is less than the price. This is of critical importance, so know how to calculate the marginal revenue. You also want to know where the monopolist profit maximizing level of output is. So you want to use the graphs to figure out that where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's this right here. So that's going to determine the output. And then for the price, they're going to take that level of output and draw it all the way up to the demand curve, because that's the highest price that consumers are willing to pay. So just understand how to find a monopolist profit maximizing level of output and the profit maximizing price. And then you want to understand how to calculate the deadweight loss that is under a monopoly. So if I give you a market and I say, okay, what's the surplus in this market under perfect competition, and then what's the surplus in this market under a monopoly, you have to be able to figure out the difference, and that difference is the deadweight loss that's created by the monopoly. Chapter 9 is all about game theory, so you need to understand the 3 elements of a game. Those 3 elements are players, strategies, and payoffs. If you have players, those players have strategies, and each combination of strategies has some resulting payoff, then you've got what's known as a game. You want to understand what a cartel is and understand why they're unstable. Know how to put players, strategies, and payoffs into a payoff matrix and solve that matrix for a Nash equilibrium. Really important is to understand the definition of a prisoner's dilemma. That is when all players have a dominant strategy, and when they play that dominant strategy, the resulting payoffs are less than they would be had both players played their dominated strategy. And so that is the definition of a prisoner's dilemma. So on the final, I may give you a payoff matrix, have you solve it for Nash equilibrium, and then an extra question I could ask is this a prisoner's dilemma or not? And if it is, you'll have to say, you'll know it is because both players will have a dominant strategy, and when they play that dominant strategy, their payoffs are lower than if they had played their dominated strategy. Also want to understand how to find equilibrium for games where timing matters. And so these are the game tree games, and you solve them using backward induction. And then the last thing is chapter 10. So in this chapter, you want to understand the difference between a negative and a positive externality. And that basically boils down to differences between the social cost or benefit and the private cost or benefit. So remember, in negative externalities, the social cost is higher than the private cost. And that means that in equilibrium, we're going to produce too much of the good and relative to the social optimum. Now, different from that is positive externalities. In that case, it's the benefit. And so in positive externalities, the social benefit is higher than the social cost, or the social benefit is higher than the private benefit. And that means that in equilibrium, we produce too little of the good relative to the social optimum. Be able to identify the social optimum outcome between 2 or 3 situations. This is kind of similar to your homework question where I say, what's the socially efficient outcome if this guy gets soundproofing or doesn't get soundproofing or something similar to that. Understand the Coase theorem and how people need to be able to communicate freely in order for them to use the Coase theorem, for them to get out of the externality problem. They have to be able to communicate without cost. Understand how government can alleviate externality problems, and they do this by forcing the firms or the individuals to internalize the externality. And so for negative externalities, they can tax companies the exact amount of the externality or the external cost, and that basically lines up the private and the social costs. And similarly with positive externalities, you can subsidize the goods, like give me an extra $20 to get a flu shot, and that will increase my private benefit of getting a flu shot by $20, and that might make it closer to the social benefit, and that way we can achieve the social optimum and equilibrium using taxes or subsidies. And then lastly, understand how property rights impact equilibrium outcomes. So this is similar to the tragedy of the commons, but also applies to identifying the social optimum outcome. So we talk about a situation where people can communicate, but we also talk about who has the right to pollute. And so if somebody has a right to pollute versus somebody has a right to clean water, that will impact whether or not somebody pollutes or not in the absence of communication. So that's all for the midterm review. I hope you guys study hard and do as well as you possibly can. Remember to print out your homework with the solutions when you take your final, so that way you've got examples and solutions in front of you that when you see a similar question to your homework on the final, you'll have something there in front of you that you can kind of help you work through the problem. Okay, best of luck. I hope you guys do really well.